let's turn to Republican Congressman Thomas Massie, who you guys probably know him, but just for those of you who don't follow these things closely, he's libertarian, and he's one of the few in Congress, and especially one of the few on the Republican side, who's willing to go against the grain. And he has voted against, you know how they've been passing all of these Israel resolutions, condemning anti-Semitism, standing up for this, standing up for that. And also, obviously, tons of money that they just voted on to ship to Israel as well. And he will be frequently one of the lone voices on the Republican side, one of the lone votes against a number of those provisions. That has, of course, made him a huge target of AIPAC. Well, Congressman Massie was recently on with Tucker Carlson, and the subject of AIPAC and how this all works in Congress came up, and his comments are very interesting. Take a listen.
Is there any other Republican who has your views on this?
Well, I have Republicans who come to me on the floor and say, I wish I could vote with you today. Yours is the right vote, but I would just take too much flack back home. And I have Republicans who come to me and say, that's wrong what AIPAC is doing to you. Let me talk to my AIPAC person. By the way, everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What does that mean, an AIPAC person?
It's like your babysitter, your AIPAC babysitter, who is always talking to you for AIPAC. They're probably a constituent in your district, but they are, you know, firmly embedded in AIPAC. And
every member has something like this?
I don't know how it works on the Democrat side, but that's how it works on the Republican side. And when they come to DC, you go have lunch with them, and they've got your cell number, and you have conversations with them. So I've had
that's absolutely crazy.
I've had 4 members of Congress say, I'll talk to my AIPAC person. And it's literally what we call them, my AIPAC guy. I'll talk to my AIPAC guy and see if I can get him to, you know, dial those ads back.
Why have I never heard this before?
It doesn't benefit anybody. Why would they want to tell their constituents that they've basically got a buddy system with somebody who's representing a foreign country? It doesn't benefit the congressman for people to know that, so they're not going to tell you that.
Have you seen any other country do anything like this? Like
no.
Russia obviously determines the outcome of our elections. We keep hearing that. Does anyone have a Putin guy that they talk to?
Not only do they not have a Putin guy, look, they don't have a Britain guy. They don't have an Australian guy. They don't have a Germany dude. Like, it's the only country that does this, that has somebody that, like, uniformly, I guarantee there's some spreadsheet at AIPAC where you know, the AIPAC dude who's matched up with the congressman is there, and then all the congressman's votes on the issue. Oh, has the congressman been to Israel? They pay for trips for congressmen and their spouses to go to Israel. I'm not the only Republican who hasn't taken the AIPAC trip to Israel, but I'm probably one of a dozen that hasn't taken that trip. And the other ones just haven't got around to it.
The AIPAC babysitter. By the way, that thing about the trips that they pay for, it's not just for politicians. It's also for any number of prominent people and media figures. Yes. In fact, I don't know if I talked about this here or somewhere else, but when I started at MSNBC, got an email asking if I wanted to go on the AIPAC trip to Israel. I said no, but you know, that's part of what they do, because then they can take you to Israel and they can show it to you through their lens and have a chance to, you know, subtly and not so subtly propagandize you. And plus just create this human sense of like, oh, yes, I owe this person something because they took me on this great trip and I had a great time, you know? So I like them, they're friends with me. Like, I should listen to what they have to say. It's very intelligent in terms of influence peddling, but I think, you know, a lot of Americans are very shocked to learn that this is how this all works, Saagar.
I mean, yeah, it is, as you said, it's almost funny because it is common knowledge here. I've also been offered many free trips to Israel. My only trip to Israel, by the way, paid on my own dime. Thank you for that. I don't take free trips from anybody. And that's the issue. Let's put this up there on the screen. What you have very clearly here, quote, bipartisanship or Republican meddling, AIPAC is the biggest source of GOP donations in at the Democratic primaries. It says AIPAC sees support for Israel as bipartisan, and its donors come from both parties. Its practice of sending money from GOP donors into Democratic races is, quote, enraged progressives. But I mean, one of the flagship cases here, Krystal, I'm sure you've been tracking, is Mondaire Jones, who has effectively disavowed all of his former progressive positions, has been basically, what has he been doing? He's been keeping them not only at arm's length, and he's been a huge beneficiary.
Well, he endorsed against Jamal Bowman's primary opponent. And
which is crazy.
Bowman is under fire. He's been very courageous on Israel, and he deserves a lot of credit. And his district has a significant Jewish population, although, you know, it doesn't cut the way that people necessarily think that it's going to, because I'll show you some numbers in just a minute. But, you know, the AIPAC donor base, it's not like your average working class Jewish American or even average like Jewish professional American. It is the elite. It is very, very wealthy, predominantly like CEOs and executives who cut big checks to AIPAC. So it's not like they're reflective of the Jewish community at large. And in fact, there was polling that was done in Jamal Bowman's district that found a very significant majority of voters in his district, which again has a significant Jewish population, said they would be much more likely to support a candidate who backs a ceasefire, which Jamal Bowman does. However, Mondaire Jones, who's desperately, you know, trying to win his congressional seat back, feels that Jamal Bowman's positioning himself as an Israel critic has been damaging for him too, and he feels afraid that that's going to be a problem for him in his congressional race. So he's made this very cynical political move to back Jamal Bowman's primary opponent and basically disavow progressivism altogether. I mean, it's just incredibly craven. And the AIPAC money is a huge, huge part of that. I want people to think about this, you know, the piece about how AIPAC is the source of the largest number of Republican donations into Democratic primary races. Like, imagine if it was a George Soros-backed organization that was being incredibly significant, the largest player in Republican primaries. Like, conservatives would be outraged at that. They would think that was completely outrageous. And so progressives really feel that way about AIPAC, which gets a significant, you know, about more than a majority of their money from Republican donors. But it's not just that as well. Here's a quote from the piece just giving you a sense of the scale of their efforts here. They say competitive Democratic primaries are the biggest targets for AIPAC's affiliated super PAC, which is called the United Democracy Project, which has already spent almost $20 million in the race this year, in Democratic primary races this year, including almost $10 million in that Jamal Bowman, George Latimer race. That makes it by far the biggest outside group in Democratic primaries, with more money flowing from that AIPAC super PAC than the next 10 biggest spenders combined. So the biggest player in Democratic primaries is a group that isn't even about American electoral issues at all. It's about the interests of a foreign government funded by largely a lot of conservatives playing in Democratic primaries. I mean, it really is quite extraordinary, quite astonishing. And the money has a huge impact, both in terms of who wins these races and also in terms of politicians look at this and they're like, I don't want them playing in my race, so I'm just going to do whatever they want me to do. And that's something that Ryan Grimm has done the best reporting on, the way that they have served as a check on Democratic candidates who might otherwise have some level of criticism of Israel. That is reportedly, again, according to Ryan, the sort of origin story for John Fetterman being the most like embarrassingly pro-Israel, like Israel no matter what guy who's out there. It wasn't that he cared about it that much before, but he asked his basically AIPAC guy where he should be to keep them out of his Democratic primary race. And he just took that and ran with it. Yeah,
you're absolutely right. And to your point about how American Jews are not the monolith that apparently all of media and Congress wants them to be, let's put this up there on the screen from Michael Tracy. Because what you see from this survey is that just 23% of American Jews plan to vote for Trump, down from 30% in 2020, despite Trump and a lot of Republican donors saying, well, you know, basically, what do they say? You're basically, if you vote for Biden,
basically, you're not a Jew.
absolutely astounding. You can see here very clearly, if the presidential election were held today, who would you most likely vote for? Biden, 61%, Trump, 23%, 10% actually say someone else. Will not vote is 6%. Which of the two-party candidates for president would be better for the U.S.-Israel relationship? You've got 50% there who say Joe Biden. So, I mean, this is a American Jewish Coalition survey, nonpartisan organization. Basically, from what we can see here, this is a pretty representative sample of American Jews. It turns out that American Jews are just like everybody else. They're stratified. A lot of them who are wanting to vote for Joe Biden are doing so for multifaceted reasons. Israel not necessarily being the number one issue. Maybe it's a little bit higher than many people who might vote for Biden or for Trump, but they're just like the rest of us. And that's been the most annoying and thing about this is Jewish students unsafe from protesters who are also sometimes Jewish, Zionism, if without the thing, I think the most disgusting thing that Biden has said throughout this entire conflict, just for me, is if it weren't for Israel, not a Jew in the world would be safe. Because it undermines the theory of America itself. It would be like saying, for me as a person of Indian descent, that if it weren't for India's existence, I would not be safe in the United States. No, my passport says United States of America on it, and there's nothing else, the passport that I have, unlike many people in Israel, by the way, who are dual citizens. So it's just, it undermines the theory of the nation state for a select group of people, which is antithetical to the very idea of what it even means to be American. And clearly, many and most Jews see it that way too.
Yeah.
That's what, it's like, who are you, Mr. Irish Catholic, to be litigating what that means for everybody else?
Yeah, and not to go too deep into the history here, but it's worth mentioning that, the founding of the state of Israel, there's sort of a corrupt bargain between Western powers that, wanted to remain, with their image of like, oh, we're on the side of the Jews and we're like, interested in protecting them, et cetera. But they didn't actually want to like take in Jewish refugees themselves. And Zionists, who really found it to be a threat, the idea that Jews could be integrated into America or the UK or France or anywhere else, they saw that as a direct threat to their project. You can understand why, because if you have a safe Jewish diaspora that's integrated into their communities, then there's less of an incentive to move to Israel. So there was sort of this corrupt bargain at the beginning that has continued to exist, as reflected in those comments from Joe Biden. But if we can go to B3, our friend Branko Marcetic did a very interesting analysis of AIPAC donors versus donors to the Squad. And he writes here in this tweet where he, tweeted out his analysis. He says he looked at more than 500 donors to AIPAC's Super PAC, which is United Democracy Project. That's the one we were just talking about. It shows nearly 60% are top-level executives, nearly half of whom work in the FIRE sector, which is finance and real estate. The average donation was nearly $90,000. Wow. So not exactly your like average person shelling out $90K. Put the next one up on the screen because he put together some great charts that really illustrate the difference here. So you can see on the left, he says United Democracy Project, again, that's AIPAC, Super PAC, Wall Street base. You can see how many of their donors, what percentage come from finance/insurance, real estate, are retired, probably from one of those industries, miscellaneous business, lawyers and lobbyists, and everything else is like pretty small. And then you look at their donors versus donors to the Squad, who have been the primary targets of AIPAC. You have 20% of AIPAC donors are CEOs, significant percentage who are owners or founders, another 39% who are top executives. That little yellow bar you see there, that's working people. On the other hand, the donors to Squad members, 60% of them are working people, and basically none of them from CEOs, founders, top executives, et cetera. So it just shows you, part of why the discourse in the media, I mean, there's a whole plethora of reasons why, but part of why the discourse in the media just assumes that all Jewish Americans have the same perspective is because there is a class divide even within the Jewish community about how they view these issues and how they prioritize these issues as well. So I thought Branko really got to the heart of some of that class divide and why you shouldn't assume that the position of AIPAC is reflective of broader Jewish American sentiment, which I think has been, consistently the case.
And this is the same for all ethnic groups. I see this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Indian Americans against it. I'm like, hey, shut up. All right, I'll keep it kind, on this one. I'm like, you don't speak for us. You speak for yourselves and your friends. And I don't ever presume to speak, quote unquote, on behalf of the community, because who's elected me as representative? Somehow, though, in this ethnic group, that's considered not only okay, but canon, and then widely accepted by a bunch of evangelical and Catholic Christians to be canon for what they presume to speak on behalf of. So totally ridiculous. It's always a class story here in America, which means that really it's about something totally different than what is being presented to you. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.